I've written a few articles here on Substack about the victim consciousness. One of them was about my relationship with like Jordan Peterson and Elon Musk. Not literally my relationship; I don't know them personally, but my my triggers that come from them. Why do they trigger me so much? And in certain contexts, not all the time. And why is this idea of the victim identity and victim consciousness continuing to plague my mind? And I think it's, for me personally, is just a place that I'm in, of trying to understand all of the narratives that I've accumulated throughout my life that continue to hold me down and hold me back. And ultimately, that's what it's about. It's victim narratives. And now it's very different from a victim mentality. It's not necessarily that I'm saying that I'm constantly being overly emotional or anything that's easily observable on the outside. It's actually very complicated internally. How easily it is for the mind to spiral downwardly and say, I'm not good enough, I'm not capable, I'm not lovable, etc. What's interesting about all of that is that that actually communicates a superiority complex. I once heard a statement of what makes you so special that you're not worthy of love, right? And I love that statement so much because it really communicates this superiority complex, this notion that like the world's not good enough for me. And in that way, that's what gets projected, is like, I'm not good enough for the world. So it's this complicated dance. It's not that any one thing is necessarily like the correct way to do it. But what's really tricky about starting to learn all of this is like it's really easy to glob on victim consciousness or victim identity as now the reason why I'm a victim, right? And it becomes meta. And so it's not about looking at this and saying, uh, I'm a victim of this, or I'm a victim of my trauma, or I'm a victim of my past. Ultimately, none of that actually matters. What happened is what happened, and what's happening now is how those things are manifesting in your life and what's keeping you from living the life that you want to live. And what are the reasons and excuses that are preventing us from doing what we need to do? So, for an example, I keep getting invitations, not literally, but like sort of conceptual invitations to go consult using either personality types or developmental models or whatever. And I'm starting to try to open up those possibilities even more too. Like, I want to do that. But then every time there's a part of me that starts to circle the drain around, well, you're dyslexic. You are not good at school. You're not very academic. You don't pull a lot of examples from your research. Maybe you don't do enough research. You're not great at creating presentations. You have to speak in front of a group of people. You're not great at that either. And it's really easy to take all of these things and start to build a case against yourself, which is effectively what that is. Uh, and so that's what's been happening for me lately, is noticing all of these ways in which I'm building a case against myself to keep myself down, which ultimately is, I think, if I peel the onion one layer deeper, is about preventing myself getting into a situation where I could fail. It's like you can't quote unquote fail if you don't try, which is like really lazy logic, because really failure is not trying at all. But I created this narrative within myself to manufacture superiority by limiting competition. I'm a 5'4" dude, and I've always done my best to skirt around competition. I will either try to eliminate the competition. I've had situations where I've been like, helped someone cheat on their partner by basically tearing down psychologically their partner, and then they choose me conveniently. Or even physically, I'm in a situation where if I stand around a tall person, that I it's obvious how short I am. So I've always tried to avoid tall people. And it's this amazing bit of karma that my wife is 5'11", and we're out in public all the time. And people don't pin us together as a couple. And I recognize in myself also that I probably don't do enough to make that obvious, like, holding hands in public and stuff like that. Things that might make me look smaller, and highlight how I'm might feel inferior or seem inferior in a situation. And it's the same thing with like not putting myself in front of people and, giving myself the potential to fail if if or at least perceiving myself as failing, right? Those are always calibrative situations where if the audience isn't reacting, maybe you're doing stand up or hosting a show, that you're getting feedback, and that is allowing you to then calibrate and do better next time. And sometimes you bomb, that's just what happens, or you don't communicate the idea, and you have to just do better next time. It's partly, I think, a scarcity thing for me, in that, like, oh, this is the only opportunity, so I have to do it really well. I've had that in like personal, physical, intimate situations where it's like, oh god, this is the only time I'm ever going to get to be with this person. I gotta like pull out all the stops, and then you end up doing a bad job. um, and uh, you rack your brain with the embarrassment of that. But that's what I'm ultimately fearing. Like, it's the fear of getting to game time and not being able to perform, and ultimately be judged, or to be criticized, or to find out maybe you're not as good at something as you think you are. And perhaps that's also part of it, is it's easy to create the belief in our minds that we are good at something when we're not. And if we just kind of play in our mind and conceptually continue to, to not challenge ourselves, and to not and to believe like, I'm too good for that, I'm too good to even try that, then it's like, ultimately the result is still holding yourself back and not testing yourself to actually improve and grow, which only feeds the fodder of like, well, life's not working out for me. I'm so smart, and the world's not built for me because I'm too smart. you know, there's like a quote I've heard of like, if you're so smart, why are you not happy? And I consider myself to be happy. I think I'm frustrated in terms of my career and my flow and contribution to life. But I'm recognizing through this exploration of the victim consciousness that I am, there's perpetual narratives that I'm holding on to as these various identities that just need to be let go of, that need to be transcended in a way. And so some of those narratives can manifest as like, I'm better than or worse than. Like I always think back to when I was in middle school, and my friends were starting to become, more friends with each other, or they were starting to date each other, and I would just feel socially inadequate. But I also didn't try. One of the things that really sticks out about my wife, she's an amazing person in terms of networking, and she has this incredible ability that if she has a goal, she will just go talk to the person. Like, she will go immediately, just go talk to the CEO or the person who has all the money and figure out how to make that work. That to me is an incredible skill, and I'm envious of that. But I could do that. Why don't I do that? What's the fear holding me back from doing that? It's the same thing in middle school. Like, I could have went up to the girl that I thought was cute and talked to her, but I didn't, because I created these narratives in my head, and I stayed in my head, and I played with all of the ideas in my head, and to not engage with life in an effort to maintain a sense of superiority. In a way, the victim consciousness doesn't like to be challenged. And I'm not necessarily even saying that I formed it. I may have adopted it from childhood, or from culture, or whatever. It doesn't really matter. It's not really about blame. It's about what it is. And what it is something that continues to manifest in my life as something that perpetually is holding me back from trying to putting myself on the scale, to be weighed and measured, to be um, compared to, and to have a healthy relationship to competition. Like, I recognize that there are a lot of people in culture right now, particularly on sort of the area that I spend a lot of time with, and people I spend time with, where there's the rhetoric of community over competition, which I think is a beautiful notion. It's a beautiful idea. But I think there is a relationship to competition that is healthy, in that you get to measure your competency, you get to measure your skill set. And competition is usually seen as like this dog eat dog, tear down kind of thing. Maybe that's their relationship to it. But really, if you have a rivalry, you're like pushing each other. I mean, the Olympics right now are just such a perfect example of all of that. Like, people are experiencing this elation, not only just watching athletes overcome their own limits, but competing with each other, and they're so supportive of each other. And healthy competition is very much a part of our reality. It's part of social engagement. It's part of testing our skills and pushing beyond the limits of what we perceived to be possible as human beings. Like, that's incredibly that's incredible. And I think for me, it's been really easy to maintain a superiority in my head and want to keep that. And in a way, I outsmarted myself and have been outsmarting myself. My ego has outsmarted me because, again, the ego consciousness, which is not really like a thing, it's just like this construct, this part of us that just wants to stay above it all. And we all do some version of this, that we want to be above it all, that to an extreme, and in my case, feels like representative of an extreme of continuing to convince myself that, like, I'm being vulnerable here on a podcast, that I don't know anyone that's listening, and I don't get feedback, and you know this isn't really brave. I mean, honestly, it's not. Talking in front of a group of people that you can see their faces and you can hear their reactions, and you can get their hugs or love or support or their rejection afterwards, that's brave. Giving a presentation in an area that's uncomfortable for you is brave. um, Developing a new skill set and becoming a beginner again, that's incredibly brave. That's vulnerable. And I think we've conflated just being emotionally vulnerable in general with uh, different kinds of vulnerability, which is really putting our ego at risk. It's putting our sense of superiority at risk. Because if I've constructed this belief over my lifetime, over the 38 years of my life, that I have this superiority over various types of people, or in various situations, that to put that at risk is like, why would that make any sense to put that at risk? You know, um, but the only sense that it's really making right now is that it's really literally detrimental to my life. I'm not making money. I've barely made any money this year and continuing to struggle. My wife is carrying the torch, and there's something about the guilt and social pressure of that's pushing me a little bit. And sinking further down into this hole of putting out stuff that I think is valuable but isn't, and I'm not getting a lot of feedback for, or I'm not making money for, I'm not making a living out of, and continuing to convince myself that that I know better, and I can do that if I'm not getting feedback. I can do that if I'm not really putting myself out there. So there's a lot of younger parts that are freaking out about all of this, that are afraid of, it's like standing at the top of a really tall jump. It's like, I don't know what's going to come after this. I don't know if I'm going to change. I don't know if I'm going to die, And in a way, there might be if I have so many identities tied to all of these little moments of my life of like rejections, which validate my victim consciousness, or all of these different moments of superiority that validate my superiority, that I've been not really living a life of faith, so to speak. I've been constructing everything. I've been constructing a sense of self. I've been constructing a reality that is not serving me. And it ultimately does need to be let go of. And that's uncomfortable and that's scary. And it frankly makes me want to burst into tears and vomit. That's probably a good sign. Um, you know, and it's going to take these moments and brave acts of actually going into it all and doing something different. And my hope is that I can do all of that. Um, I know I can. I just have to be willing to have the humility to do it, and in a way get over myself, which I think is hard. And so that's the paradox. I think it's like we think about the victim as something that's very culturally focused on right now, in a lot of positive ways, in the sense that there are legitimately people who have unequal starting points of various kinds, whether that's like trauma related or disabilities or uh, whatever situations there are, that in society find different organizations, institutions, governmental things to try to support the ability for people to have a better chance. And then it's another thing altogether to construct the feeling of being a victim when that's not necessarily actually the case. And in any given moment, the idea of the victim identity is like taking a moment or taking something that at the moment you were a victim of. It's not, I'm not disparaging the idea that like other people cause problems like they do. And we need to not become further victims of those people. uh, but that moment is not something we need to carry with us. That's why we do a lot of healing work. That's why we work to let go of that stuff. That's why we work to move forward. And it's really hard to do that in a subtle sense. It's really hard to do that with psychology, which is intangible. Our inner world is not tangible. We can't touch it. When I say the word victim, maybe it'll come up in your head as an idea, as like a word in your mind, but it's not tangible. It's like it's either a feeling or it's a construct in the mind. It's not really, it's not effable. It's not tangible. It's not touchable. Um, so it's slippery. And most of the time when we're working through and trying to figure out our psychology, it's like dealing with this slipperiness that again we can like outsmart ourselves. And in my case, I very much have outsmarted myself to take these moments and just cling to them. I mean, this is being reflected in someone very close to me right now, that I'm working with him to pay attention to this. And it's very much reflecting that in me. And in a way, that's a gift. And in another sense, it's like creating the urgency in me to like do something different, or he's going to have the same fate and have a lifetime of difficulty unraveling this, because he's got other people in his life that are doing the same thing. And I do see a pattern in this. I don't think I'm the only one. I think that's why I've done a lot of work with INTPs in the Myers-Briggs system, which is now the intpproblem.substack.com, by the way. And I might post this there as well because it's very relevant to where I'll do a different version of this. But with the type of personality I bring to the table, that's outsmarting myself becomes really easy to do. And we have there's less consciousness around what I feel about all of that stuff. It's really hard to access the raw narratives and feelings there. So it becomes this sort of insidious, undermining thing where the culture carries it, and we don't realize how much it's baked into our culture to create this feeling within ourselves. It's really difficult to release that. And it can attach to so many things. Personality types are one of those things that it can attach to. It can very much feel like You learn that you're a certain personality type, and if you bring your prejudices, or you bring your biases, you bring your victim stance to it, then the first thing you do, which is what I pretty much did, was see how the world doesn't honor your personality type. And we may do that with, all the ways in which we look at maybe astrology. And it's like, I'm having a hard time today. Mercury's in retrograde. That's the most common kind of jokey one. But people legitimately believe that. And if they have an explanation for why things are going wrong, then there's a certain dependency or resting into that. And it creates this kind of dependency with life. That's really what the victim consciousness is. If you approach it from the lens of the drama triangle, which is this method of looking at victim on the bottom, and you've got hero or rescuer, and then you've got persecutor or victim. That's a codependency triangle, and that codependency with life is often what is keeping us from transitioning from a victim to creator. That what's happening right now, like, it's that idea that everything happens for a reason, but we can really exploit that idea that my life is in shambles for a lot of shitty reasons. And again, it may or may not necessarily be true what's happening. Like, I do think there are certain circumstances that are bigger picture responsibilities. Like, I'm not involved in government, and that has trickle down effects. But also, there are probably things I can actually do to influence my situation that are relative to, I don't know, getting involved in government or running for office or talking to my local legislator or, getting involved in some way or calling someone to see what my options are. I love the word option, and that the root word of opt means vision or choice. And when we start to use optimism, it's not a toxic positivity, it's just seeing that we have a choice. And often a victim consciousness, the number one narrative is, I don't have a choice. I don't know what to do here. I'm stuck. I have no options, right? And those are just beliefs. Those are usually perpetuated beliefs. Even one of my favorite books, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, where he was a prisoner in Auschwitz, stripped of his clothes, stripped of so much of his everything, that he still found, amidst it all, what is ultimately still his, which is his self and his soul. And that there are certain things that just can't be taken from you. And that even in the most dire of circumstances and situations, I would argue one of the worst in existence to have ever occurred, that you're not completely ever out of options. And I think we are in a world or in a place or at a time where, I just did this post on the Developmental Digest, which is another Substack I have, the developmentaldigest.substack.com, which is about human development and looking at developmental models and sort of breaking all of that down. That I just did a post on what I call the idealism wars. There's the term, the culture wars, kind of going around, but I think it's more than that. I think it's an idealism war, and it has been raging for nearly a decade. And in that idealism war, I think we are often faced with the beliefs around existential threats, or these assumptions that these choices are going to lead down this route, when we have yet to really actually be in the face of an existential threat. And in the situation with Viktor Frankl in the concentration camps, like, that was an existential threat being faced pervasively. And in that created a sobering moment. And I think for us as individuals, I don't think it necessarily needs to take that extreme. But internally, it maybe feels like that extreme, where we can, for some reason, we have this ability to want to end our own life. I don't know why that is. Maybe there's a relationship to sacrifice. Maybe there's a relationship to I don't know. But there's an ability to create the belief within ourselves that we're not worth living, that we're not worth being alive. I shared a recent article here on Substack, dopamine.substack.com, about the um, the problem of shame. And shame creates this constant internal narrative and spiral, the way that we talk to ourselves about um, not being worthy of being alive or being loved. And there's a certain gentleness with ourselves that I think is important, whether it's in acknowledging the superiority aspect of it, or in this sort of self bullying that we do, or the external bullying that we do. In a way, that's what's happening. I mean, you're taking an internal narrative that there's a part of you that has a superiority stance that is denigrating another part of you. And then it could very well be that that other part of you is deciding that it doesn't want to take this anymore and ends your own life. And I'm not a proponent of that. I don't want that to be the case. I don't think anyone should. And I'm hoping that as we continue to develop the expertise and the ability to support people through parts work, through projections, interjections, and complicated psychological work and various pathologies and situations, that we can help people through all of that. But ultimately, it does come down to, at least me and my observation and what I've read and what I've researched and what I've talked to people about, it comes down to being gentler with ourselves. And even gentler with the superiority part, because the superiority part is feigning and inflating superiority for a reason. It's the same situation that you see when there's a lot of women antagonizing men, and there's a lot of men antagonizing women. That's like America having this split ego state right now. And with ourselves as individuals, we have this conflict back and forth where we're antagonizing our internal selves back and forth to each other. And this inflation, which I think a lot of young men do have, um, maybe we've had to because we felt inferior as a child. Maybe it was like very emotionally overbearing and we had to toughen up. You know, a lot of men, we got a narrative around toughening up in some way, shape, or form. Or created it for ourselves. I think I created it for myself and also surrounded by it, to where toughening up is just what you needed to do, especially in my case too, because the emotional world was just not a strength. So I didn't go that direction. And so there's this feeling of like needing to create a false construct of superiority, to have complaints about everything, to create a higher sense of greater expectations of reality around us, and to feel like we're above it all, like we have control, right? Anxiety is another big thing where we have a desire for control. And so ultimately, all of this, you know, these two states are kind of at war with each other, this superiority state and then this state that's just taking all the punishment, that doesn't know how to set a boundary against this. Um, because maybe you didn't know how to set a boundary against someone externally, or you've never had a boundary placed against you. Maybe you've been able to be so slippery that no one's been able to set a boundary against you, and to set a boundary against what you're capable of, and to tell you, no, 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 this is not your realm. You're not good at this. And having not had that at a younger age may create this fear of now doing it later, because then that changes your entire construct of yourself. If you find out that you're not as good at something as you think you are, or you're not as quote unquote manly as you think you are, or or as emotionally intelligent as you think you are, right? That's often kind of the male female divide right now. I think the masculine feminine divide is like this belief of emotional intelligence and this belief of physical intellectual intelligence. Um, and that's me getting a little snarky, but I think there's this like fight fawn on the right side and freeze flight on the left side that um, that I think is we're seeing it manifest in real time, this challenge with these different states talking to each other. And if I were to make a social diagnosis, I think there's a really big challenge with boys and girls being treated as opposites, and especially at a young age in school, being treated as if boys and girls are like enemies. And I think that's just kind of manifesting in a lot of our world today. Um, and I don't know how to fix that. I don't know. I mean, it's like school system stuff and gender roles, I think, but also not having an understanding of archetypes, that there are warriors and healers and different types of people that want to be different things, or different personality types, that there are feeler men and there are thinker women, and that basically removing the personality traits from the belief of poor patterning of men and women, and getting a little more nuanced. But that's bigger picture work that I don't know will be resolved in our lifetime, but something I've noticed and paid attention to. But either way, I, regardless of what the why is, because sometimes the why can really get us caught up in perpetuating the victim narrative, right? Like we find out, oh, it's my parents, or it's the school system, or it's the government. That only makes us feel this sense of like, well, if only those things weren't in my way, I would be amazing. You see how the superiority is like kind of disguised in there, right? It's like this false sense of like, well, I've never been in a fight, but if I did, I'd probably kick everyone's ass. It's like, I don't know. You haven't really tested yourself, so you have no idea. Um, and that's really it, is the willingness to test yourself and be brave enough to test yourself. And there is this, there's this kind of cowardice to it in a way. And I think that's, and when I speak about being gentler to ourselves, I think it is about like, catching myself in that moment, referring to it as cowardice. But really, it's like, it wouldn't be fair to call a kid a coward, So it's like, how can we be gentler to ourselves to do two things simultaneously that seem contradictory, which is to acknowledge the challenge and then to apply pressure to grow. It's like, I can see how that's hard. I can see how that would be really scary to do. I can see how putting yourself in front of people to talk and to give a presentation and to put your ideas out there, to potentially be misunderstood, to have them potentially be misinterpreted, or to find out that that's not very interesting, or to not have an impact. Like, I can see how all of that is scary. And at the same time, you just won't know until you do it. Like, you need to try. I think not giving up is more important than continuing to spin the ideas in your head that it's going to go wrong. And then you find out, and then you can adjust, and then you can be better. You can improve it, right? It's and I don't think anyone in that situation is going to be setting out to judge you. I don't think that's their goal. I mean, if they've got preconceived stuff, if they've got their own victim things and their own superiority complex, then sure, they're going to do that. But that's just them trying to reinforce their stance on reality. And it has nothing to do with you and your ability and what you're trying to do. So I believe in you. I believe that you have the bravery to be able to do it, to give it a try, to give it your best try, and to not get in your own way. I think you're perfectly capable. And for you to do it is not going to be a threat on you being able to hold on to this narrative. And one of the reasons we hold on to this narrative, that was me talking to myself, by the way. One of the reasons we hold on to this narrative is because we get something out of it, right? And I think the edge that we eventually get to, and the edge that I think I'm getting to, is like, I'm not getting anything out of this anymore. you know, I'm getting the ability to talk about it, and I've got a lot of stuff to learn, and it's all very interesting, but it's not serving me. Like, it's like I could, if I wanted to perpetuate the victim narrative, like I could, it would be enabled by people around me if it were continuing to be something I could carry forward. Like if my wife, who I do truly believe is going to support me no matter what, if she didn't have a limit, because I know she has a limit of what she will tolerate, if she didn't have a limit, then like I could even push to where that limit is. Or let me say this other way. I actually believe that she will be with me no matter what. And my victim stance will probably, if there was a limit, know where that limit is and try to push towards it. And then our relationship breaks apart, and then I blame her. And that just reinforces my victim narrative. But because she's staying her ground and holding with me and basically communicating and expressing and conveying and demonstrating unconditional love, and maybe there's something that's lacking in there, or something lacking in the past, or whatever, her demonstration of unconditional love to me, which I'm sure there are conditions, there's always conditions, but as far as I know, like, it would take a monumental effort for me to find that. And she's holding that space for me. And now I can't rely on her to do that forever. I need to hold the space for myself too. I need to show myself that gentler side, that unconditional love and support, to be able to navigate and get through this and to continue to make life work on my own esteem. With her showing of the unconditional love to me, it's just not giving me room to be slippery, you know? And I think finding those areas in which we realize we can be slippery is important. To just like, it's like working with a kid. Again, I mean, a lot of this might be inner child work, or it might be earlier worldview work, where it's taking a gentler approach, not gentle parenting, but it is taking a gentler approach of like not enabling, but saying again, I want to, I see what you're saying. I understand your complaints. I understand the challenge. And the and is important. And there's pressure to grow. Molly provides both of those to me personally. She's like, I validate you, and I see you, and I understand it. I believe in you, and I understand your strengths and what you can do. And I need you to show up. I need you to do things. I need you to do this. I need you to, there's a limit, there's consequences, there's boundaries that she's communicating to me. And so it's one thing to experience, we can sometimes just experience one or the other, right? We can sometimes experience the boundary, and that's often just kind of nagging, and that feels unfair. And sometimes we just experience the validation, which doesn't have the pressure, and then we just get kind of spoiled. Then we just get enabled to continue to do and feel the way we already do and feel. So I think both ingredients are incredibly important to be able to move forward. And I think that's what I'm experiencing, acknowledged within myself, something I've been witnessing from her to me. And now I got to do that work for myself to be able to say, yeah, I see how this is hard. That makes sense. That really sucks. I know you don't want to do the paperwork. I know you don't want to call these people. I know you don't want to do the dishes. I know you don't want to do X, Y, and Z. But this is your life. And, you got to show up for it. Part of what I'm trying to do with my kids, my stepkids, is recognizing the principle within me that my job ultimately, which encompasses a lot of things, but my job ultimately is to make sure that they continue to survive and that they develop the skills to survive on their own, which includes social skills, emotional skills, physical skills, intellectual skills. There's a preparation angle to all of it. And then also giving them opportunities or finding opportunities for them to experience wins and to push themselves a little bit. And that the work for me is being very much reflected in my work with them. That I'm needing to be patient to validate. Often I don't want to validate. That's the part that I want to skip. I just want to nag and I want to push. But the validating is important because then that calms the mind and creates the ability to be listened to. And then to say, and I expect this of you. I expect you to be able to do this now. And it's just one day at a time, one push at a time, one little thing at a time. You know, we were at the Renaissance Fair, and my stepson was doing archery. It was like a little play archery thing, and he was really struggling and frustrated, and would very quickly give up. And I told him, I was like, no. He went over to his mom, and mom protects him, and that the mom creates the reinforcement of the validation. In a way, we play mom and dad usually end up playing those roles, right? Like one person's the validator, one person's the pusher. Or sometimes, parents can be both of one thing, or they could do neither of them, right? I think when most people are talking about needing the balance of both parents in someone's life, they're usually talking about, I think, that dynamic, that there's someone that validates and then there's someone that pushes. But I think one parent can do both. And I think both parents can do both. Like, that's incredibly powerful. If both parents can do both, holy shit, right? So in that situation, he went over to her, and I kind of signaled to her. I was like, I understand his feelings, but also, like, I don't want him to give up. And so she agreed, and she pushed him over. She's like, yeah, okay. No, I understand it's hard, but, like, you need to do it. You committed to it, and you need to do it. So he came over, and I tried showing him. And then the kid that was running the thing was not really doing he was trying to push things along. He had his own pressure from somebody who was watching him. And I was like, wait, my kid is having a hard time with this. Can you help him? We're not going to rush him along. I want to create the boundary and the barrier for him to be able to accomplish this and to be able to do this well and to focus the energy. So I helped my kid out a little bit, and we tried to show him some skills. The kid came over and he showed a skill that I didn't have. So it was a little humility for me. And even at one point, my kid was right about something that I was wrong about. And so I later said, like, I understand that was frustrating. I'm glad you did it. I'm proud of you for doing it. And also, I was wrong about the technique, and you were right. And I apologize for pushing that. You knew better in that situation. And I think all of those ingredients, created a better situation. Now he was struggling and frustrated, and he's got a lot of other stuff going on. But ultimately, as we continue to nurture and support him, I'm getting clarity on, again, as a parent, my job is to support him. My job is to make sure that they survive, and to make sure that they can survive on their own. Those are my two main things. and then with that is also the ability to validate how they feel and support them in the difficulty of the wrestling with the complexity of the emotional experience, and to create the push forward to say, like, no, but you also need to try, and you need to make the effort, and not wallow in being the victim of a situation, and to transition that feeling into action, that feeling into being a creator, which goes into the empowerment dynamic, which is the other element of the drama triangle. The drama triangle is the hero, villain, and victim, or the rescuer, persecutor, and victim. That transitions into the victim becomes the creator, the persecutor becomes the challenger, and the hero or the rescuer becomes the coach. And we can all navigate between these different roles, but it is about ultimately releasing a codependency relationship, not with just people, but with life, and saying that life is making me a victim. But no, there's always an option, there's always a choice. And sometimes that choice starts from validating the feeling and then and pushing the energy forward and saying, yes, I understand you feel this way. I get the frustrations. I get that it's hard. I get that it's tough. I get that it doesn't always make sense. And this is the way life is. You know, you're going to become more independent, and it's going to be better for you to learn independency sooner. And we don't necessarily learn that. Like, there's no guarantee that we'll actually ever learn that as adults. The hope is that we can create systems and create um, pathways and philosophies that create the ability for more and more people to have sovereignty and be conscious of their agency throughout their life. Um, but for now, it's like we just have to do that on an individual level. And the fact that I'm figuring this out and it's working for me, and I can pass this on to you, is hope that these are the seeds and sparks of the beginnings of new ideas and new ways to go forward in supporting the next wave of the development of human consciousness. And a lot of that comes through parenting and self-parenting, to create the respect for not creating a shame spiral for ourselves, and then also not overinflating a sense of superiority by not trying. And in that way, you need both ingredients. And so it does require being gentle, but then also being firm and being direct. And so that's a tough paradox to gather. But I think it's not necessarily a roles thing. It's not a female or male thing. It's not a feeler or thinker thing. I think it's something that we all do for ourselves, and we can nurture and communicate within our children to what I think is to end this cycle of this collective split ego state of being antagonistic towards each other, to being having literally one side of the aisle very focused on being gentle, but then having this very aggressive shadow, and then this other side that's focused on being stoic and aggressive, but having this incredibly soft belly shadow. You know, it's that cohesion is going to be really important for going forward on a collective scale, but then on an individual scale, we do that for ourselves, and then we subsequently teach those things for our kids. That starts to heal a society who is only getting one half of the narrative, and that's literally manifested in an entire generation of people that is struggling with this. So it's not about necessarily going out and preaching all of this and trying to force people to heal, but I think that when we start to do the work for ourselves and start to demonstrate this wholeness, and then put it into our kids or support them, or create healthy dynamics in the people that we come across, then that basically spreads like a healthy virus. I don't know if healthy virus is the right term there, but it spreads like an antidote, kind of thing. So I don't know. The goal always here, I think, is to just do the work for yourself. And really, I'm just communicating the work for myself. This is what I'm doing, is learning to be gentler with myself. And at the same time, there are going to be areas where I need to push a little bit that I haven't pushed. And it's and not pushing in the areas I've already pushed, not pushing in the areas where I've already burnt myself out. It's pushing in the areas that I haven't tried yet. It's pushing in the areas where I've psyched myself out. It's pushing in the areas that are in flow, that are going to challenge my sense of self, and I'm sure I'll have more to say to that as I go forward. So I appreciate you for listening. This has been dopamine.substack.com. You can subscribe here and support with a monthly subscription. That would be amazing. And you can also check out, I referenced the developmentaldigest.substack.com. That's another Substack that's available. I have these different Substacks. So if you really ultimately just go to letsgocnote.substack.com, that takes you to my Substack profile. And then I have publications underneath that. So I have the INTP problem, which is INTP specific, the Developmental Digest, and a couple other places where I have things where I'm putting my thoughts and ideas and writings, and dopamine itself is staying in the territory of depth psychology and what I'm figuring out about my own story and situation. So, all that said, the last thing is I really would encourage you. You can find it at the bottom of this email or in the show notes. I have a course called The Wisdom of the Three Centers. It's based on the Enneagram three centers of intelligence, the head, heart, and the gut. And it's asking questions of each part of ourselves to figure out what each part is wanting from us, and then also what we usually want from that part of it ourselves. It's another way to get some integration and some centering. And it weaves a little bit of Enneagram in, a little bit of Myers-Briggs in, but you don't have to understand any of those models to fully get something out of this. It's a way to get a better attunement to the self. And I think it's a really powerful course that that you can reference and take with you and continue to do some powerful work with that will ultimately serve your growth journey. So go check that out, linked below. It's also on dopamine.substack.com. There's a courses tab. Click that, and that'll take you to my courses, which I have other INTB courses and stuff like that available there as well. So that's it. My name is Chris Rivera. Thank you for listening to Dopamine, and I'll catch you on the next episode. See ya.